Uh, Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to day 2 of MoonCon 2022. Thank you for joining me. My name is Frances Billinghurst, for those who do not know me. I am an initiated witch and I have 2 books that have been published through Moon Books. One of them, Contemporary Witchcraft, and one that I'm sort of going to be focusing on in my talk today in relation to the Dark Goddess. So thank you again for joining me. I first would like to just acknowledge that I am being live streamed from Kaurna country here in the Adelaide Plains. So the Kaurna people are the traditional custodians of this land, and as such I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. And good morning or good evening, Annette. It's night time here in Adelaide, so I'm assuming it's probably about 11 o'clock in Scotland. So I do have a presentation that I hope you are able to see. Please let me know in the chat that you can actually see the screen. And I can start because I'm wanting to talk about the Dark Goddess. And hello, Trevor. So yes, it looks like you can see my screen, which is fantastic. So the Dark Goddess, who is she? What is she? She's such an interesting concept. We have so many interpretations on her or about her. A lot of them seems to be someone scary, almost like a demonic creature. These are 2 sort of deviant art depictions of dark goddesses. Is she a natural goddess herself? Is she an archetype? All negative energy, dark and spooky. I can go on. These are just some aspects that I have heard in association with her over the last number of years. Within my own personal style of witchcraft, and which is a religious spiritual practice, I actually see the Dark Goddess as both a collective title, shall we say, for one aspect of the Great Mother. The Great Mother is both light and dark, the yin and the yang. And I also see her as specific attributes or aspects of this divine feminine. So for me personally, it is a little bit difficult to see her as merely as an archetype, especially when I've had rituals where she has stomped through, shall we say, even if it's been on the inner planes or my psychic senses, and demanded things of me to do for her when I've been doing ritual. So that's just how I work with her. I acknowledge that we are all different, and there's really no wrong or right way of working with her, perceiving her as her energy, as she, at least in my opinion, is very much of a paradox. She's both nurturing and also terrifying, which is, I guess, in a way, what sort of drew me to connecting with her very unpredictable nature, her or forever changing nature, and also the sort of underlying aspects. If you're looking at her from more of a sort of like Jungian-based psychological aspect in relation to shadow work for us to improve our spiritual growth and where we're actually heading in our own life development. So probably one of the better connections or associations with dark goddesses is that of the underworld. And throughout this presentation, I am just going to throw a whole lot of goddess names at you. If you don't know who they are, please leave a note in the comments. I'll address them towards the end, and after this presentation has been finished, then I can go through and maybe give you some links and some more information about them as well. So, as I said, I find her very unpredictable, very much of a paradox, and sort of an underlying asset or aspect of all her attributes is one of trust. And we need to trust her. We need to surrender to her. And it's very difficult to do that with somebody who basically seems to be hell-bent on upsetting our nice little conformed lives. But to me, that is very much what these dark goddesses are all about, pushing us out of our complacency and really shaking up our little sense of normality, basically. So, Underworld Goddesses. First one on the left is Ishgirl from ancient Sumer. She seems to get a bad rap, especially if you know the story of Inanna's descent. I have always had a little soft spot for Ishgirl, and in a number of workings over the years, I've found that she seems to contradict, or my experience with her tends to contradict what is often depicted of her, that she's ugly, that she's frightening, that she's surrounded by skulls, that she's vengeful and angry with Inanna. Yet there is, in my personal experience, a confusion because she doesn't understand why she's been labelled as such. She is a very deep goddess, and yes, she has the sort of life and death, death and life aspect to her, but that's all part of the natural cycle. And again, this is what I think these dark goddesses tend to remind us of, is the connection of this life, death, rebirth cycle that we are all naturally part of. The second underworld goddess that I've just got here on the screen is Persephone, and this is probably a more classical image of her and Hades. And it's really interesting here because they are both actually holding grain or also fruit of some kind, which you don't usually associate Persephone and Hades with. It's usually Demeter, who is the goddess of grain. Again, Persephone is a bit of a paradox goddess, I shouldn't say creature, in that she is originally depicted as the nubile innocent maiden, as Kor or Kore, and then when she is either abducted or goes into the underworld, she becomes the queen. So she steps in her own power beyond her mother. And we can see that happening in our normal lives, especially if you're a parent, as children begin to strive to step into their own power and loosen the apron strings. The last goddess here is Hel. And some people say that her name was the inspiration to the Christian Hel with the 2 L's, which is a little bit ironic because she's a Norse goddess, and according to the Norse myth, she has one of 9 realms that she rules over, and they are all basically filled with ice and snow, as opposed to the fiery pits that we are more associated with in the Christian stories. And then associated with the underworld goddesses are those who talk about or are connected with the unknown, and in particular death. Something that our modern age that we tend to ignore, this final aspect that we all go through. From Irish myth, the washer of the ford, one aspect of the Morgru or the Morrigan, who, as it says in the stories, that if you are a hero or a soldier going to battle and you see this woman washing blood out of her clothes, that could be an indication that you're not going to fare too well in your battle. And hello, Tracy from Adelaide. Thank you for joining me. I hope it's a little bit warmer where you are up in the hills. It's freezing down here. In the middle, Madame Bridget from Haitian Voodoo. She's one of the Geddes, who are connected with the cemeteries, and she is the wife of Baron Smaldi. And she's associated with death. She's associated with what's left after we have sort of gotten rid of the shackles of this mortal coil. And then finally here is Kamundra. Now Kamundra is from the Hindu mythology, and some people say that she is an aspect of Kali, only that she appears in skeleton form. So Kali, as we'll mention in a moment, can be very frightening in herself. Kamundra, however, is the skeleton. And we see her here with a lot of Kali symbols, in particular the skull necklace, the multiple arms. This time she's got 8 in this depiction, and each of them are holding a sacred symbol. That if you look into her myths, again, they all have specific purposes and have been given to her by all the various gods within the Hindu pantheon. Connected with these goddesses of death are the bringers of destruction and creation. Now, I have to confess, I have a thing for Kali, or maybe she has a thing for me. I haven't quite worked that one out, but to me, Kali is very much the paradox. Even within a Hindu culture, she is both feared and revered. She is the void. She is the blackness. She is the mystery. She is about direct action. She entices us to surrender our ego, our preconceived ideas, asks us or demands of us at times to put our head onto her chopping block. And that way we are offering up any preconceived restrictions that we have to her. And just as a little side note, I actually have a sadhana or spiritual journey coming up at the end of this month in relation to Kali, but if we have time, I will briefly talk a little bit more about that at the end. Then we have, probably if you're watching this from England, a little bit closer to home, the Kalik, the blue-faced hag of winter, who creates the land from the rocks that fall out of her apron. She's also part of the tug of war between winter and spring with Bridget or Brie, which again is sort of like a female version to the Oak and Holly King. This little battle that happens at the turning point of the seasons. And finally here is Tiamat. She comes from ancient Babylonian stories, and I find her very interesting because it's very hard to get a true, accurate picture of her. This is someone else's version or interpretation of her. Originally, she was seen or described as a sea serpent. She was the one who ruled over the salt waters. Her husband or consort, Apsu, was the sweet waters. And where the two mingled, the coming together of the waters, then came forth all the other gods of the Babylonian pantheon. So this could actually be where the Tigris or the Euphrates River actually blended into the oceans. Now, what I find interesting with Tiamat is although the story involves her losing the battle with Marduk, and from her body she was turned into the heavens and the earth. When I've done meditations with her, I have tended to end up somewhere in the cosmos, almost sort of space cadet material, should I say or confess, in that it almost indicates that she predates Babylonian myth, and maybe she is somehow connected with that originating point of the universe, the Big Bang. Now, this might not seem to be what we think about as a dark goddess, but these goddesses create and destroy, And this is the whole thing that, at least to me, that I see these goddesses keep reminding us of this ebb and flow, that we can't have life without death, and we can't have advancement or growth without the destruction of the old. And they keep reminding us of this ebbing and flowing all of the time. And that seems to be a nice little segue into the initiators and the shapeshifters. And again, some of these can be frightening, like the Morrigan, as we see on the far right. Very complex goddess. I know we have a number of moon book authors who have written extensively about the Morrigan or the Margru, and I'll leave it to them because I sort of have a limiting knowledge when it comes working with her. Also, Baba Yaga, I find a very interesting character. She's often depicted as some kind of grandmotherly figure. However, my grandmother never had a house that was in the middle of the forest on chicken legs. So I don't know about this grandmother association with Baba Yaga. We also have Credwin from the Welsh stories. We've heard a cauldron of transformation, and she was also the initiator of Gwenyan and basically taught him to go through the elements with all the changing of the animals, and at the end she was the instigator for his transformation into one of the greatest bards of all time, and that was Taliesin. The last goddess here that I have is Scathach, who find a very interesting character because she appears in Irish myth, even though she is said to live on the Isle of Skye up in Scotland. And it is, she is the initiator of the heroes, in particular Cuchulainn, who had to do his famous salmon leap to get to her isle. Of course, this is all before the bridge was erected. Yet in Scottish myth, as far as I'm aware, she actually doesn't appear, at least as far as I have been able to find. So she only appears in the Irish stories, which is quite interesting. I did spend some time on the Isle of Skye back in the 90s, and again, could not actually find any reference to her outside of the Scottish myth. So with the initiators and the shapeshifters, we then have the next category, and these are the bringers of change. And here we have Kali again, because she is one of the main bringers of change that I have personally experienced and worked with. But first we have Oya from Western Africa, who can roar through our life, upsetting everything, especially where we get too complacent. She is the bringer of the fresh starts, even if we don't want them. And it is said that she is the winds that arrive before the thunder, because the thunder is her husband, Chango. She's also depicted or associated with the water buffalo. So she is a very strong, powerful goddess, and one that can really help us if we feel that we are too stuck or stagnated in what we want to do with our life. Just looking at some of the comments. Yes, Isabel. Tama, she is a dragon or a sea serpent, depending on what sort of story or interpretation you read of her. And yes, to Sam, she also is often depicted in D&D or Dungeons and Dragons. Got my friend Kali again. As I said, she is the bringer of change, especially again if we feel stuck, if we feel that things are not going with the direction that we want to head into, and we can't really understand why. Some of these goddesses, you need to have a little bit, as I said, of faith and of surrender, that they're working on planes or realms that maybe we as humans do not quite understand yet, or we can see only a part of the whole picture. And the last one that I have in this section is Medusa. I see her change as probably more eternal than being external, as she also challenges our perceptions on things and how we see ourselves. I said, these are just my interpretations of her or of these goddesses. You may, in fact, have other associations with them. But with Medusa too, she's connected with the masks that we wear. And she's a good goddess to work with when we're sitting there and looking at all the aspects of ourself and their relevance in our own life. Do we actually need to be the mother, the caregiver, even the father, the companion, the savior of all these people, which, especially if that's drawing the energy away from us, or if we keep giving and we don't get anything back in return, or we're not able to receive for our own selves. So Medusa also encourages us to look at the possibilities, the potentialities that's out there. After all, not everything is what we may seem. It was from her blood that Pegasus arose, so we can't be, or we shouldn't actually see ourselves being contained and limited to the masks that we are wearing for other people. Next section of Dark Goddesses: warriors, defenders, protectors. Again, from the Hindu myth, we have Durga, and she is interesting. She is often depicted as a warrior maiden, yet she's also Ma Durga, Mother Durga. She is also Mahadevi. She's one of the 10 goddesses or aspects of the divine feminine within the Hindu pantheon that they see as the divine, and along with Kali. So I find Durga and Kali almost intertwined in some aspects, and indeed in some of the myths, Durga is fighting the demons and she gets angry because she can't defeat them, or she needs some assistance, and it's from her third eye that Kali emerges. So the two of them are very connected, with Durga being probably more of the warrior aspect, while Kali being more of the destroyer. The middle group, the Furies or the Indris, are quite interesting because, again, they are defenders, but they're also protectors, because they are the ones that you call upon where someone has slighted your family. These are the terrifying tormentors who are very strongly protected of their kin. And woe behold anybody who steps out of line, especially people who have sort of sworn an oath to uphold or to protect, and then do the opposite. We also have Ishtar. Now, whether this is Ishtar or Inanna, that's often open to debate. Again, we're looking at ancient Sumeria or Babylonia, and it's very hard, especially in this day and age, to actually find which depicts these goddesses. I personally think this is Ishtar because she has more of a war or warrior aspect to her, but that doesn't mean to say that Inanna didn't have a warrior aspect to her as well. Ishtar is both a goddess of love as well as battle, and she was invoked to defend her lands and the people against the invaders, but unfortunately that didn't go very well because there were massive invasions, especially within that area that we know today as Mesopotamia. got these dark goddesses of unsavory emotions, in particular anger and rage. Pele from the Hawaiian Islands, the volcano goddess, and Sabbats from ancient Egypt are well known for their rage. Nephthys from the Greek myths is often associated with the Furies, but she tends to hand out divine justice to the wrongdoers. So she can be very useful. If you're going to court, you've got a legal battle coming ahead, to call upon her. However, better make sure that your perception of the truth is the actual truth, and that you weren't somehow involved in misconstruing the truth. So she can be likened a little bit to the Egyptian goddess Maat, where her truth is divine truth and not just our truth, our perception. Sabbats, the lion, very interesting, because again she was initially called upon or evoked to defend the sun god Ra's, I suppose, his reputation, his wounded pride when humans decided that they didn't need to worship him. He was getting old, they were making fun of him. So he called upon Sabbats, who decided to then punish the worshippers. But a bit like Kali, she developed a bit of a bloodlust and actually had to end up getting drunk for her to be subdued. Now, some people say that her subdued aspect is best, but as far as I'm aware, it is Hathor, the cow goddess. So Sabbats and Hathor are the two sides of the coin, as opposed to Bast or Bastet, who is the cat goddess, and Sabbats. But again, it's open to interpretation. Ancient Egypt has a very long history, and again, the mythologies there seem to shift just as much as the sands do. Pele, of course, being associated with the volcanoes, the eruptions, the lava. Again, as far as my understanding of the myth was, her anger was based on jealousy, again, because I think her sister decided to form a relationship and didn't want to be single or go with Pele and do what Pele wanted. It's been a while since I've read her myth, so I could be a little bit shaky on that aspect. Moving on from these dark goddesses of these emotions that we tend to suppress and ignore and push down are other aspects of ourselves, our sexuality, our sensuality. First one is Lilith, another paradox. Is she a goddess or a demon? The original stories, especially from more of a historical point, seem to indicate that she actually was just a demon, or she started off as, I suppose, a tree spirit. But in modern worship, especially in the modest goddess movement, she has become a symbol for regaining sexual freedom, especially within the goddess cultures and the goddess movement. I do find her an interesting character, especially if you're looking from a historical sense and looking from sort of the Hebrew, where mothers would used to draw sigils or symbols of protection and talismans around the cribs of the babies to protect them from Lilith. Then we have the mermaids, and I suppose they are more connected with the sirens than the silkies, in that they tend to lure men to their doom, usually on their rocks, drag them into the water with their sensuality, with their songs, and with the selkies there, who were the seal ladies. I sort of associate them a little bit with sort of unacquainted love. Or if you wanted or you fell in love with a Selkie and you wanted her to be your wife, it was almost like you had to find her seal skin and almost entrapped her. So the sexuality and sensuality, the relationships can be taken both ways. They're not just, I suppose, what we see today as romantic love, where it's a level playing field, especially with the Selkies. It's almost like there's conditions involved. Moving on, sort of a breath of fresh air with the mystical and the magical dark goddesses. Maybe not with Circe, though, especially if you're reading Ulysses' myths and you're one of his men, where landing on her isle, that she would turn you into an animal. But all these goddesses have that magical, mystical aspect about them. They are also teachers of the magical arts, of the herbalisms, of this sort of the hidden knowledge, the occult knowledge that we know of today. They ask us to go within to seek that wisdom that's found often in solitude. If we're looking at the myths of Nephthys in particular, she seems to be outshone by her more extroverted sister Isis. Yet there's been a lot of discoveries these days that are sort of indicating that maybe this silent goddess of magic actually had a cult following equal to that of her more extroverted sister. There's something about Nephthys that keeps drawing me in, and I associate her with silence. That sort of almost frightening aspect when we turn inwards and listen to our thoughts and then go beyond our thoughts to get that divine inspiration. Morgan Le Fay from the Arthurian legends, again, I find very fascinating. I have to confess, I grew up on the Arthurian legends, and over time, Morgan's journey, shall we say, from Fairy Queen through to the stories that we associate with her today. And it's really puzzling to understand someone who has the heir to Tintagel Castle. She's also the heiress to Avalon, decides to give all that up to become a handmaiden or a servant to the Queen Guinevere, where there is a huge degree of animosity between the two of them that I do not understand at all. But Morgan can also give us a lot of insight in relation to our own value that we place on ourselves and whose life are we actually living? Are we living a predetermined life from other people, society? Are we stepping in our own power? Or are we constantly giving that power away because we don't want to take that self-responsibility? And that's one thing that I find very interesting with these dark goddesses. Regardless of who we are, they ask us, almost demand that we take responsibility for ourselves, our actions, and our own lives. There are no scapegoats. And of course, we have the final group of dark goddesses that were probably more associated with her, even though Hecate or Hecate is another paradox. There's many aspects to her. Some people see her as the cosmic soul to the world. Other people see her as the terrifying keeper of the nightmares, especially of the three realms. And also Bathkatha, again, another aspect of the Morrigan, but she is more bloodlust. She's the one who haunts the battlefields. She's the one who can be downright dark and spooky and will leave us cowering in the corners if she appears in our nightmares. When it comes to working with the dark goddess, it's common to use her or these aspects of ways of exploring our shadow, these aspects of ourself that we have basically since childhood, if not earlier, if you believe in past lives, ignored, neglected, suppressed, pretended didn't exist at all, that we feel shame or guilt about, that we keep pushing down into our subconscious, rather like sweeping dust under the carpet. And we all know it just doesn't go away. I do find that shadow aspects tend to linger in the subconscious, manifest, almost taking on a life of their own to re-announce themselves, often in a very inappropriate manner or time. So what dark goddesses challenge us are owning our anger, owning our rage, working through our fear, becoming friends of the things that frighten us. They challenge us about being complacent when we give away our power. They challenge us on our views of sexuality, sensuality, our relationships, everything about this whole cycle that we are caught up in, the life, death, rebirth. They don't necessarily aim or enable us to move through and forget or overcome our shadow aspects, but what they do is help us understand and acknowledge that it's okay to have fears, phobias, things that we dislike, that we are able to be angry at things. And sometimes it is better to let that rage out, hopefully in a more appropriate manner, challenge that energy, whether it's digging in the garden or having to go down to the gym and beating up a boxing bag, than suppressing it, because that's where a lot of our internal issues can continue and then re-emerge, often as we get into middle age and beyond. I also connect with the dark goddess or aspects by simply working with them as a way of understanding my place in the greater scheme of things. As I've been shown, there's so many different aspects to the dark goddess, and they're not always terrifying byproducts of our nightmares. I tend to work on a more theosophical or philosophical level, and they help to bring us back to a point of connectiveness, point of balance that we have as a society, especially in the West, lost over the last 2,500 years, where we have focused largely on the light, so to speak, and ignoring all this messy aspect, the uncomfortable stuff, which is all just part of life itself. And I do love this quote from Emma Ristel, or this comes from, I do believe it's another, either Moon Books or a John Hunt publishing book, or an O book, Kissing the Hag, where she says, the dark goddess, the primordial aspect of deity, birthed us. By her touch, she awoken the darkness within our own souls, allowing us to perceive and reflect on things around us. For without this reverence, we are lost. Science informs us that our planet circles the sun star, which we rely on for light and heat. It is little wonder, though, that religions focus on the light as the pivotal focus. However, and this is the bit that really stands out, the source of all creativity, of all creation, of imagination and potential is by its very nature a place of darkness, the dark womb of creation, yet we are afraid of the dark. So some people, as I said earlier, work with the dark goddess or energies solely during the waning moons or dark moons. Some people use her purely just for protective or baneful forms of magic, like cursing, binding, blasting, smooting enemies, each to their own. I see the dark goddess as having ways of reflecting back at us our own stuff, really, our own essence of humanity, our own failings of being an enlightened being. After all, there's a reason why we are born on this earth plane and not, as the Buddhists say at Bodhisattva, why we are here in this earthly realm. They have an uncanny way of reminding us of what exactly is important, the core essence of things through their own unique way, often of stripping us back to the core. Very much like if we're decorating a house, that we can no longer keep just painting or wallpapering over the cracks, that sooner or later we're going to have to strip everything back and fix that foundation. And that's what, at least to me, the dark goddess does in all her myriad of forms, all her various aspects. She strips back these layers that we've carefully wrapped ourselves up, kind of like past the parcel. She keeps stripping us back to the bone. And then when we believe that we think that we can't take any more, she then strips us back even further, only to start to rebuild us up again. And she keeps doing that until we, as ignorant human beings, I guess, begin to take the lessons, because it's not a temporary fix. It's almost like once we understand one level, another level comes up. And I'm beginning to think I'm running out of time, which I do apologize for, because I thought I had done this perfectly. So just wanting to wrap up. Here's where you can find me. As I said, the book Encountering the Dark Goddess. I do contain a lot of the 13 goddesses that I've talked about very briefly, and Isabel, handmaiding to Guinevere. It's probably just my terminology. She just wasn't part of Guinevere's court in the Arthurian legends. She didn't take on the roles that, maybe it's just my interpretation of it. As I said, she was left in Tintagel Castle. She was also being trained up to be priestess of Avalon, and she turned her back on that. So said, I'm running out of time. I do apologize. Just briefly, as I said, at the end of this month, I'm doing a journey into freedom with Carly. It's an online sadhana spiritual journey. We get emails every day for 21 days. These can be found on my web pages or Facebook groups. I'm also got gifts from the goddess. It's actually a month-long sadhana. And once this recording has been uploaded, I can put the links there if you are interested. So again, I will just see if I can stop. There we go. Again, thank you very much for joining with me. I will, so if you want to know any more about these goddesses, I just went through a whole lot of names, a lot of gobbledygook. I do have this little thing for mythology. Said 13 of them are in here. And again, thank you very much for Moon Books. Yes, I will put the links there, Audrey, and I hope you enjoy the other speakers that are coming up over the rest of this weekend. Blessings and thank you.